What's the most inappropriate thing you've witnessed at a funeral? An estranged uncle driving past my grandmother's funeral playing Another One Bites the Dust. And then more cars are following him playing the same song. Then another one does. And another one does. And another one drives a bus. I hate myself for laughing so hard at this. At my grandpa's funeral in 2006, a random drunk woman that no one in our family knew stumbled in and started singing show tunes, then crying till she was escorted out. I'm not going to laugh. I'm not going to laugh. My sisters and cousins and I all had a good laugh about it. My grandpa would have loved it, which helped lol. My own kids, boys ages 10 and 8, at their great-grandfather's wake, they got a chair and moved it to the casket and started making his mouth into smiley face, laughing the whole time. When me and their grandfather, my father-in-law, saw it, I immediately pulled them away and told them they shouldn't do that. Grandpa laughed and said it's fine. He would have really loved that they did that. We later found out that the great-grandfather had asked the funeral home ahead of time to put a sign in his hand that said thanks for coming, but they refused. I want a get well soon balloon in mine. When I make a will, this will be the first instruction. At an open casket wake, a friend of the deceased attempted to give her a drink of single malt whiskey. She ended up being forcibly removed as she wouldn't stop and spilled a lot of the alcohol in the casket. It was as horrible and inappropriate as it was heartbreaking for everyone. Someone should have told her the morticians usually wire the deceased's jaws shut to keep the mouth from opening. Oh yeah, I'll try to work that casually into conversation. Alright everyone, before we go in, just one quick note to make. I know we all loved Heather and her wicked keg stands, but she has now crossed the eternal threshold from 40 ounces to freedom. And even though it would be friggin' awesome, please do not pour anything into, or on, her corpse. You forgot to add, because her jaw is wired shut. They had one simple job. The funeral home putting a random guy in my grandfather's casket, suit, glasses, and wedding band, while then admitting that they had misplaced my grandfather was fairly inappropriate for a funeral. How the fuck do you misplace a corpse? At my cousin's funeral, one of my relatives literally tried jumping in the casket with him. Really traumatizing experience, I might add. They adjust the funeral booster, paid him $1,000 for that. Every funeral needs a hype man. At a family friend's funeral, a man I allegedly met when I was 3 came up behind me, pulled my head back by placing his hand on my neck, and told me that I might not remember him now, but I will someday. That creepy old dickfoot. He was right. I was at my then boyfriend's friend's funeral. Her aunt sat with me at the back and told me that she spontaneously lubricates at funerals. Scooched away real quick. She meant her eyes, right? Her whispering eye. He's up there, orgy. My father's funeral. After the service and the reception after, my mother, brother, and sister headed back to our family home. A bunch of my father's siblings and their family were also staying at the house with us. We got home a few minutes before everyone else. I was sitting at a table in the living room when I could see their cars come down the driveway. They all got out and were hugging and seemingly congratulating each other. The reception after the service was beautifully put together and was actually a fun time, a fitting send-off for my father. So I assumed they were still just having fun from that, until they came inside. They all came in together very quickly, and quietly. They came up to me, and my older brother sitting at the table, and kind of crowded around like a bunch of kids, about to see if they could have a cookie before dinner. My Aunt Barbara smugly stood at the front and asked, "So when are we going to be doing the reading of the will, to see what was left to us all?" My brother and I just looked at each other for a few moments, before we turned to them to say, "Are you kidding? Reading of the will? Like a soap opera? There is no reading of the will. Everything that belonged to my father now just belongs to my mother." The look of defeat, but not shame, was disgustingly transparent. They were supposed to stay another few nights. They packed up and left that afternoon. This is literally the shittiest thing I ever read. WTF did they expect? That your dad would leave nothing for his family, wife, and kids, and give everything to his extended family, his siblings. This is the most disgusting thing I've ever read, and I've read about the coconut. The coconut was sexy, not disgusting. How dare you? My step-grandmother died a few months before the Borat movie came out, so everyone was in full-blown Borat mode. Someone's phone went off, and their ringtone was "Throw the Jew down the well." Did your step-grandfather walk up to the casket and say "my wife"? Someone trying to quietly open a can while they were doing the closing prayer. There's a bowling ball joke in there somewhere. At my grandma's funeral, there was a woman that had a really bad relationship with my grandma, but one of my aunts invited her to the funeral. She started receiving people as if she was a family member and tried to put herself at the center of everything. Removed. Just as Uncle Jimmy would have wanted them to be doing. Yeehaw. My brother-in-law's girlfriend locked herself in a car, cried and screamed threatening to kill herself at my father-in-law's funeral. She was fine 5 minutes later and explained to my in-law she did it because she's not used to not having all the attention. She thought her being pregnant would make people forget that the father died. That's disgusting. And your brother-in-law is going to be forever attached to crazy because she got pregnant. Oh, it's bad. She had that baby 2 months ago and she's pregnant again. It's been the absolute worst. Godspeed. Leave me out of this. Probably. I witnessed the estranged drunken druggy daughter of a family friend come screaming into the visitation looking for her brothers because she had found out she was never written into the will. It was a hell of a scene. Semicolon. Not super inappropriate, but my grandfather was always a trickster. He had a great sense of humor. He had this little song he would sing to me, my siblings, and my little cousins, where he would just repeat the words "poo-poo-pee-doo" over and over. At his funeral, my aunt was telling stories about him, and in the middle of her telling a story, my 6-year-old cousin screamed "poo-poo-pee-doo" in front of 50 people. Needless to say, it lightened the mood a little bit, and made everyone a little happier remembering him in a good way. Was your grandfather can-I? Scoop-dee-whoop-dee-poop, poopity-scoop. Yes, in fact, he was. Till can-I's dead. We had a snowball fight outside the parlor of my Pop-Pop's funeral. Pop-Pop would have approved. The non-family mourners seemed horrified. I cannot stand the whole "you have to be sad at funerals" thing. I hope something silly like this happens at my funeral. The mother of the deceased putting on a terribly acted and meth-fueled show about how much she loved and missed her daughter. Shortly thereafter she was convicted of the daughter's murder. Oh shit. A relative of my husband died. There was a gathering at her house after the funeral, hosted by her husband. It was mostly family of my husband, but there were a few friends. There was catered food and drink and people were just general socializing and telling nice stories about the deceased. About 2 hours in, a man and woman in their mid-20s show up. They are acquaintances of the widower. They walk around the house a bit, grab a drink and then disappear. I was asked to get some more drinks from the garage, which was off the kitchen. I opened the door and stepped into the garage. There was the young couple, leaning against a car and engaging in some pretty vigorous sexual relations. Another family member who was standing in the kitchen saw what I saw. I backed out of the garage because I was fairly embarrassed. I mean, who does that at a funeral? I guess the other relative told the widower, because the next thing I know there is shouting from the garage and the widower is telling these two people in no uncertain terms that they needed to leave. Apparently, not only were they having sex in the garage, but they were doing lines of coke off the hood of the car. Only a few people who were at the gathering found out what happened. Thank goodness. r/trashy. Only somewhat inappropriate, but certainly the funniest thing. It was a funeral for an uncle I was very distantly related to. And, this is happening in Greece. In the summer, the church is very full and incredibly hot. You can smell the sweat. There's incense. The air isn't circulating. And the priest is just going on and on. I don't think I can describe how grim the situation was. Not totally unexpectedly therefore. Just as the priest is getting to something particularly emotional, a man, an old colleague standing near the back, faints. He's completely out. Now, this guy was very tall and rather broad. So not only was it a miracle that he didn't take out the two tiny old ladies right in front of him, he was also really difficult to carry outside to get some air. Somebody has the brilliant idea that the palperers, those people who carry the casket, should carry him, since they've practiced it and are reasonably strong. So everybody squeezes a bit tighter. Nobody wants to leave the church. Things just got interesting. To let them through, they pick him up. 3 on one side and 3 on the other. That is, more or less as they would the casket, and start carrying him towards the door. Suddenly, this guy wakes up, turns his head several times, grasps what's going on and who's carrying him faster than anybody can respond, and immediately starts yelling, "I'm alive. I'm alive. I'm alive." At which point, one of the Palbras laughs so hard that he drops what was thankfully a leg, and the others struggle to put him down in what is now a church, absolutely exploding with laughter. The whole situation went on for a good 15 minutes, in which this guy walked outside and the priest tried to resume the service, but there absolutely continued to be giggles throughout. I, being a teenager at the time, also couldn't possibly hold it back every time I thought of this guy yelling he's alive. Nobody was even particularly upset, because the uncle we were burying was always laughing and joking around, so it somehow felt appropriate that we had a great laugh at his funeral. That is certainly the funniest story in this thread. Not a funeral, but my grandmother was on her deathbed. She was going in and out of consciousness. My asshole father and his asshole sister start arguing over who will get her wedding ring. Not for sentimental value, but because they wanted to sell it. Anyway, to make a long story short, they took the ring off, and their mother came out of consciousness, and the first thing she said was, "Where is my ring? Fucking scumbags." Wow, I thought my family were bad. My aunties won't talk to each other because one of them just helped herself to grandma's 1920s gramophone, so the other confiscated the 1940s mantle clock she was supposed to have. Classy. My best friend died last year from a random heart failure at 25. The pastor at the funeral went on for about 10 minutes about how we had all killed him because we were sinners and that we should join his church to make amends. He didn't know any of us. It was very uncomfortable. At my grandfather's funeral, the stand-in, curmudgeonly pastor kept calling my grandfather by the wrong name. "Pastor, we are here to memorialize the life of John Smith. XLIT. Pastor, John Smith lived a good life. I had never personally met John Smith, but," my spouse loudly, "well, I've never met John Smith either. His name was Bob White." Everyone attending burst out laughing. My ex came back from her grandfather's funeral. I had to work with family reunion pictures of herself, her siblings, and her parents, posing next to the open casket. When I casually commented that I thought it was a little off, she explained that they did so because grandma otherwise wouldn't believe he died. My mom's family are big funeral picture takers. I think it has to do with the fact that they are very rarely all in one place together, so they take advantage of that and take pictures when they can. Doesn't mean it's not creepy. Pictures, not creepy. Pictures with the casket, tres creepy. My cousin's funeral, he was 27 years old and killed in a single car crash after he hit a slippery patch on the road and smashed into a concrete wall. At his funeral, all of his brothers, sisters, and parents sat on the front row at his graveside service. Then, lo and behold, my cousin's ex-girlfriend of over a year shows up and immediately inserts herself onto the front row next to his sisters, and proceeds to scream, cry, scream, wail, and throw herself on the ground periodically throughout the service. All of the family just gave her awkward stares, with no one wanted to address her inappropriate behavior. I had never seen that type of attention-demanding drama queen antics before, or since. Go up to her and whisper, "Keep it up. No one will cry that way for you when you're gone." Destroyed. Picture, if you will, two elderly women in a funeral squaring up as people are still crying from the ceremony. At the lunch after my grandpa's funeral, his daughter from a previous marriage, D, who no one had seen in years, showed up. D had been writing bad checks all the way to the state prison and had definitely had some unresolved beef with my family when she got out. The last time my mom saw her was when was 11, and D left her infant daughter for my mom to babysit and never came back. Fast forward to the funeral. D is acting like it's a family reunion, but no one is having it, since she's basically screwed everyone in the room in one way or another. My grandpa's last girlfriend, a legally blind woman, tried to physically fight her until others stepped in. D, you bitch. What a bird. My mum and sister were smoking weed at my cousin's funeral. He was only 16 when he died, so there were lots of kids there as well. My mum also wanted to surprise everyone by sending clowns to said funeral, who were going to paint butterflies on their faces, because my cousin died of epidermolysis bullosa, known as butterflies disease. What the fuck? A clusterfuck all around, man. At my great-grandmother's funeral, her son showed up to the funeral wearing khakis and his bright orange Tennessee Vols shirt. Then he started yelling at my mom when she asked him who the Palbras were going to be, mainly throwing a fit about who was in the will. Mind you, we hadn't even left the funeral home yet and were literally needing to know who they would be at that very moment. Needless to say, we don't talk to that side of the family anymore. One of my best friends died in September. There were some questionable circumstances surrounding his death, in that we were all pretty sure it was drug related, heroin. Anyways, the guy that got him into the stuff, who shot him up the night he died, showed up to the funeral. I cold killed him. Similar thing happened to a friend of mine, odd on heroin. The guy who shot him up was one of his pal bros. The lady who convinced my mother to ditch chemo and use essential oils, handed put biz cards at her funeral. Please tell me you destroyed her then and there.